as much as I love Elbow, and I do love Elbow, we've got business to get on with. So first of all, wasn't that brilliant? It was great to hear from Sir Alok. I mean, really brilliant, inspiring start to the day, and I think it gives us a lot of energy and hope. I think because sometimes when we're in our sector, you can not see how we're perceived from the outside. So when someone looks from the outside and says, actually, what you're doing is pretty amazing, and it's one of the sources of hope in the energy transition, I think that gives me a bit of a spring in my step this morning. So not that I needed any help. So first of all, coming of age. That was the theme that we came up with. We had a little bit on Sir Alok's ideas about what that means. It'd be great to hear from each of you what you think that means to you. So I'm just going to go around in a circle, if that's all right. So Melissa, let's start from hearing from you.
Great, thank you. Yes, thanks, Dan. And good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here today. So coming of age, I think when I started to think about this, it really resonated with me. I think maybe it's because of the temporal nature. Personally, I do like to reflect back and think back about kind of, the challenges we've had in the past. And I really think that's important for then how we frame the industry going forward in the future. And I'm never one to hold back on reflecting and thinking back. And so really kind of when I was preparing for today, I took myself back to the very, very early days of Dogger Bank projects. I was lucky enough to work for the Four Wind Consortium, as I'm sure sort of lots of other people in this room have crossed paths with Dogger Bank over the years. And it was soon after actually being awarded the zonal development agreement. And the project team sat around, had a red line on a map capturing a huge area of seabed. And we were scratching our heads in terms of how do we do this? How do we deliver projects? How do we design projects? How do we maximize value? That all seems like straightforward stuff, but maybe just to kind of frame the time a little bit more, we were a decade into offshore wind at that point. We weren't, a new industry, but in terms of capacity, we had nearly 1.5 gigawatts installed in the UK. The largest turbine spinning was 3.6 megawatts. There was no Paris Agreement, no net zero targets, that hadn't even come into fruition. There was no supply chain obligations. The BVG assessment criteria for assessing local content hadn't been drafted. The sector plan was just a twinkle in Claire Perry's eye. There was no CFD. The competitive auction hadn't driven costs down to the extent we see today. And I have to say, grid and curtailment were barely a side note on the risk register. So it was a very, very different environment. Wind forward 13 years. With our partners, SSE, Vagron, Equinor has seen sort of significant milestones along the way, not least first power late last year. And I think as any parent, sort of when you've nurtured a child or a project into being, I think there is a sense of pride when you go through those milestones. So I think that is a coming of age of a project, but for me, the real coming of age is seeing those projects, and whether it's Dogger Bank, whether it's East Anglia, whether it's Hornsey, providing really the scale to actually have those learnings in the industry. And what we have seen is the industry really adapt in terms of standardizing technology, driving down costs, innovating, and adapting to change that's happened over the years. We've seen the leasing processes, consenting processes, route to market processes, all adapting alongside that. And we'll come on to some of those points in more detail sort of throughout the panel discussion, I'm sure. But maybe just to wrap up, I think, a coming of age, and you used it in your term earlier, we have come of age. I think that's one way of looking at it. When I was growing up and doing my education and left home and got a job and became a grown-up, I finally thought, I've come of age. But actually what I realized when I started work was that's really the beginning. The breadth of opportunity still available there, the learning we still need to do, the adapting we still need to do, really just starts at that point. So I think, I challenge you on that, we haven't come of age. I think we have got to a point now where, we are mature, but really the opportunity now is sort of before us to actually deliver as an industry and continue adapting and making this a really successful industry in the future.
Yeah, they say you don't learn to drive until you pass your driving test, so that's true. Charlie.
Hi, thanks Dan. So hi all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm Charlie Jordan. I lead the renewables business across Scottish Power, Iberdrola. Well, first of all, I should apologies to whoever's doing the subtitles for the accent. So that's a tough one. Or even worse, I was a bit worried that one of these automated ones that makes me think of that sketch, you know, for those that have seen it, the two Scottish guys in the lift who can't get out because none of the two of them can say 11 properly.
AI is remarkably powerful, by the way.
So, I mean, when I was looking back, I mean, we got our first licence in the UK for an offshore wind farm. When was it? 21 years ago, 2003. And you can see then you talk about certainly been at a measured maturity across industry. And thinking about this question, I was thinking about it from the perspective across industry, but also from me personally, but also as the organisation that I privileged to work with. And I was then liking it back to going to university. So first of all, you've got to decide actually what subject do you want to do, what industry do you want to be in. And I'm glad that we took the decision to move into offshore wind. And then once you made that decision, you know, it's like going into your first day at university. What the hell's going on? What am I doing here? And you're looking about and you're trying to find someone that seems to know what's going on and maybe knows about. So at that point we met Orsted, they're good friends. And like many friends you meet in your first day at uni, I mean lifelong friends thereafter. But then you start and you develop and you mature, and then you've got to go out and you've got to be held accountable for what you do yourself. You know, you're doing your thesis if you're doing that analogy. We did that with our East Anglia 1 project, you know, major project, first one in the CFD auction, and built that out. And that was one of the projects we've seen cost reduction trajectory, you know, in the first CFD auction coming down, but all the social, environmental benefits that we're able to take forward from that. But then you go beyond that and then you get to the stage of maturity, as Melissa was talking about, you actually, once you get your job. And that's where I think we're at as an organisation. You know, we now as an organisation, we're building projects, 5 offshore wind farms in parallel. We're working cross continents. And it's quite incredible to see the scale of growth, you know. And that's not just related to my organisation, that's across the industry, that scale of challenge and development. But also the people, you know, I look back to people that were very early in their careers now leading multinational companies, developments, projects. It's quite incredible to see the development of people across industry. All that's looking back, I think, looking forward. And one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to this conference, I think, over the coming days, and you just need to look at each of the sessions and you look at the challenges, but also the opportunities that we're looking to tackle. You know, vital issues about how we're going to grow the industry, how we're going to make sure that we can be real part of society, politically accepted across all the areas that we're going to be working in, and make sure people can really see the benefits. But again, repeating the point, you know, if coming of age is reaching maturity, I think we've got a heck of a lot of maturing still to do, and we've still got a lot of growth to be developing as well.
Alice, you could come from a slightly different perspective, really, but you know,
Yes,
that's great to hear
and I
from
was
you.
just reflecting. I mean, I always say I lived the energy transition in real time. My first job was on a coal-fired power station, actually Ratcliffe, which is the last one running, and then moved through commissioning gas plants and then to offshore wind. So it's really tempting to start reminiscing about projects I worked on and that early phase. But I am here today. I moved into National Grid about 6 years ago, and I am here today really to take that perspective. So maybe to add to some of the statistics that have already been shared. But, you know, in 2013, 40% of our energy still came from coal, and last year it was 1%. You know, and it will be none next year. That's an extraordinary transition. Half of all the power last year came from zero carbon sources. A third of it was wind. There was a day last year when we generated 22 gigawatts from wind alone. So extraordinary progress. And from a National Grid perspective, we're sort of well into the delivery phase of the biggest upgrade this network has ever seen since its inception. We're going to spend 11 billion in this price control, 3 billion on ASTI projects, which are accelerated strategic transmission projects to support the 2030 wind targets. That's 17 major new infrastructure projects across the UK. So, you know, we are firmly in that delivery phase. And so, yes, it's really exciting. Yes, it feels like coming of age. But your analogy really worked for me. What comes next is different again in terms of pace, delivery, and focus. And, you know, the themes have been mentioned. We still have a lot to do to get that social license, to get communities accepting the infrastructure bill that is needed, to tackle planning. And all of that will serve to unlock the connections queue and get those connections to the grid. So still a lot to do.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Duncan.
Yeah, do you know, it feels to me like our industry's coming of age is my own coming of age, and I still think I'm almost getting there. More than 20 years ago, it was North Hoyle, first commercial offshore wind farm in the UK, but it was 30 onshore adapted turbines close to shore, shallow waters. I think what we've done since, 10 years ago it was Westernmost Rough, the first commercial deployment of the first 6 megawatt platform. And then 5 years ago, this time of year, we were halfway through commissioning the turbines on Hornsea 1, the first gigawatt scale, far from shore. When we think of all the technology and project journey we've grown up with, we've really done some amazing things that we couldn't have imagined more than 20 years ago. And then I look at what we're doing this year. This year we are, in Ørsted alone, building 7.6 gigawatts around the world. That's 2 projects off the east coast of the US. That's 2 projects in Taiwanese waters. It's 2 projects in German waters, and it's Hornsea 3 in the UK. So, that's a project almost 3 gigawatts in one project. Projects are now 2 to 3 gigawatts. It's an enormous change we've made, and it's going on around the world, a bit like your 20-year-olds, also going traveling. We're going traveling, we're doing this. We're becoming an industry where we need to think a little different way about how we get this stuff done. The execution part, the delivery part, is so much bigger than all of the other parts. Our supply chains get involved at a totally different scale, and it's the moment when we test everything we do in the build-up, all of those years of development, of design, of bidding, of contracting. It's when we test how good we are, and we've got to bring in so many more people, so many more companies in that phase. And I think that's an enormous challenge. I think in 2023, I was looking at the G+ data for safety, and there was an enormous increase in the number of hours worked. And what it showed us was we've got quite a lot to do in terms of making sure they're worked safely and that we don't hurt people. But it also showed that we did okay in 2023 in the sense of bringing an enormous increase in the number of hours worked offshore. Yes, we had an increase in incidents, but in terms of frequency, it was broadly the same standard. And I think that's almost like a bellwether. If we can bring people in safely into our industry and get them working effectively and efficiently, that's probably the indicator of us being able to do that much more broadly with supply chains and everything else we need.
Yeah. No, it's really good insight. It's amazing. When you just describe that journey, then it's like the steps that we've gone through in such a small amount of time, really, is quite incredible. Stephen, what's your perspective?
Yeah, morning, Dan. Hi, everyone. It's interesting, actually, just reflecting. 20 years ago, I was involved in a project off the coast of Ireland, Arco Banks, 25 megawatts, heralded at the time this was the future of offshore. Ireland, unfortunately, is stagnated a little bit. Now we're starting to get some energy again.
Yeah.
But it's important we reflect on actually how much progress has been made in the UK in that period of time. When you think about it, 40% of the installed offshore wind right across Europe and the UK is here in the UK. 50% of the FIDs taken last year, and this was a year after no FIDs were taken offshore, was in the UK. So I think, and even the lessons of building, together with our partners, whether it's SSE, whether it's across the industry, building the deepest water offshore wind farm at Seagreen, the largest in the world. I'm sure Duncan and I will probably debate which is the largest, but we'll still go with Dogger Bank in the first instance. Melissa will support me, no doubt. But when you look at the commercial, the technical innovations that we've really driven, over the last 20 years, you can't but look forward without lots of hope. Because ultimately, as Sir Alec talked about, what we do really matters. What we do is making a profound impact, whether it's job creation, whether it's direct investment in the UK society, or whether it's actually dealing with the biggest challenge, which is climate change. We are making a profound difference. The challenge now is actually, how do we go from 14 that's currently installed, I think it's 22 or 23 that's installed and constructed, to 50 by 2030. That is a very short period of time. Within that period of time, we need to expand and accelerate grid. We need to expand and accelerate planning. And we need to deliver big projects. The idea of a 25 megawatt project, we're now building 1 plus 2 plus 3 gigawatt projects. That's what needs to be built. So for me, it is about hope. It is about delivery. And it is very much about really taking acknowledgement of the impact we can make, But for society, creating those 100,000 jobs by 2030, direct investment up over nearly 100 billion, this is profound changes that we're at the forefront of doing. We now need to get on and do it.
Absolutely. And I suppose in that extent, and I should just say at this point, but sorry, that we, in a first for Global Offshore Wind, we are live streaming this. So, you know, smile, you're on TV and all that kind of stuff. We've got, we've got an election coming up. And we're going to hear later today from Claire Coutinho, who'll tell you about how we're going to get to 50 gigawatts or treble offshore wind, as is in the Conservative manifesto. We'll hear tomorrow from Ed Miliband, who'll talk about quadrupling offshore wind by 2030. And he will tell you passionately that he thinks it's possible, even though we will probably sit there and think it's bloody hard. You know, what do we, and I'm not going to come to each of you for these questions, so please just chime in. What do we really want from a new government? You know, with that in mind, the ambitions and the targets are great, but what do we really want from a new Secretary of State? Maybe Duncan, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I guess sat right in front of us here in the UK, it's difficult to ignore. We've got the allocation round 6 coming, and we need that to be an absolute success, and that means volume clearing. It means good projects getting into the execution phase. And then, of course, we need AR7 to follow on and also be a success, but that will only work in parallel with success in our other pinch points. So, you know, supply chain, grid, planning. A lot of this is a familiar story over the years, so we need to work together with government on that. And we also need to, I think, ask ourselves, what does government need from us? Because actually it's businesses which get most of this stuff done. Government, of course, got a role to play, but I think we need to ask ourselves, what do they need, what part do they need us to play? And that might be in skills development, it might be in helping create the conditions jointly with government for supply chain investments. How can we give the line of sight? How can we give the certainty to supply chain so that they can make their investments? Because it's that will become critical path if we do succeed with AR6, AR7, grid and planning, and so on.
Go on, Charlie.
I was going to say, I mean, when you look at it from a UK perspective, it's the same perspective globally. We've got, I think it was 64 nations going to the vote. I think you said it, Dan, almost half the population. You've got the EU elections, you've got the US election, the horizon as well, all very significant. And you see the perspective changed. You see that there's a different view of renewables, of net zero. But we all believe in the fundamentals of what we do. We all believe there's a compelling case and a need, and therefore I think there's incumbent on us to make sure that we can tell that message. We can make sure people understand why we think this is the right thing to do. In terms of what we ask, all the things we ask about at the same time, you've got to speed up consent, speed up the delivery of grid, speed up the development of skills. We need to do all of that. But I also think what's really important is cross-government support. And I don't just mean that every government department seems to have a role to play in consenting and delivering our projects, whether not being a blocker or enabler. But also the departments tend to represent different areas of society, and we need everyone to be understanding why we want to do this, and we need to work with everyone to mitigate their concerns, to make sure that we can support them, and then they can support us on this journey of decarbonisation.
Absolutely. Melissa?
Yeah, and I think, what we'll see is a lot of the election being kind of excuse me, fought on financial grounds. And, one thing the governments can do, which doesn't have any fiscal impact, is actually set out a strong commitment. And, what we need to see, whether it's UK, any other country, it's the government getting behind the industry, putting in place step targets. UK, we've got our 2030 target, but what does that mean in terms of 2035 for decarbonisation of the grid? What does that mean in terms of meeting our, legally binding 2050 net zero targets? So, putting in place those step targets backed up by, the contract for difference rounds, the leasing rounds and so on in a kind of programmed effect, I think will really help the industry and the supply chain really stand behind this.
Alice, I want to come to you on this because in September last year, the Prime Minister stood in Downing Street behind a lectern and talked about grid. I mean, that must have been quite weird. I mean, it was weird for me, but I mean, people don't really talk about grid. Prime Ministers don't talk about grid.
Yeah.
Is almost the message to an incoming Secretary of State, whoever they are, just keep going doing what they're doing, or is there more that needs to be done?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, everyone says supply chain grid, planning. I think it's worth maybe for a second unpacking what drives the connection lead times to the grid, because there's two things really. One is you either have real new infrastructure projects because you are rewiring the grid away from the coal seams to the offshore sources. And there your lead time to build is about planning, and it's planning of linear projects, which means multiple communities are impacted, different planning authorities, different views. So unlocking the planning and finding the right balance between recognizing the responsibility you're putting on communities and the imperative of net zero will be really key. And we would really like to see things like a presumption in favor of net zero infrastructure. Yeah. Because actually, the first thing we have to do is make the case for the infrastructure every time. And so a really clear message there of getting a grip of that in planning. A spatial energy plan that's set out what is expected where would also help bring clarity, and manage expectations and go on that journey. And so really, really keen to see that. The second thing that drives lead times is infrastructure that may not be needed, that is being triggered by this hugely oversubscribed pipeline and technology mix that might not be the best technology mix. And so that, what you have happening there is, if you're the first or second project wanting to connect to a substation, you'll probably get a good lead time. But if you're the 7th or 8th, then you're triggering whole new extensions of substations, whole new overhead lines or upgrades, and that puts you back in the world of lead times associated with planning. So we're really keen to work collaboratively with government, Ofgem, ESO on further reforms on the connection that reduce and reorder that pipeline to the technology mix and the locations that we want for this net zero economy, and in a way that gets the economy moving. The message is grid infrastructure is absolutely essential to this journey. We have done great work, extraordinary work over the recent years on reforms, but there is more to do, and particularly that is about planning and a spatial energy plan that unlocks connections.
Absolutely.
And Dan, it's not just on the grid side, because to Alice's point, I think there's been fantastic progress and delivery over the last number of years. Also, from an offshore wind farm's point of view, Melissa talked about Dogger Bank. You think about Dogger Bank, we started talking about Dogger Bank back in 2008, and it almost took 12 years to get to financial close. Ultimately, a big part of that 12-year period was the planning process. So actually, to get real about our targets to get to 2030, we need to see significant changes, and whether that's around, around resources, particularly around the complex areas of planning, whether it's around statutory obligations in terms of recognising net zero and reaching our 2050 targets, as well as actually mitigating, obviously, some of the challenges. That really has to happen sooner. So I think that's top of the list in terms of actually when the new government come in. We're going to general election now on the 4th of July. Really important that we get on top of that from the start. And I think the other piece to mention as well, in terms of we've talked about the allocation rounds. I think, again, candid conversations about allocation rounds. AR5 didn't work. Mm-hmm. AR6, if you look at where the budgets have been set in terms of reference prices, we need to hit 20 gigawatts between AR6 and AR7 to have a realistic chance of hitting our 2030 targets. Yeah. It is unlikely, as we sit here today, that AR5 is going to deliver the big numbers, or AR6 is going to deliver the big numbers that we need. So in terms of AR7, Duncan, you talked about, if AR6 does not deliver 10 gigawatts plus, AR7 then has to be a really big auction, almost a mega auction, to ensure that we're on track, to give the certainty we need for the supply chain, to create the jobs we're talking about creating, and to make the inward investment from now to 2030. Big asks, I appreciate that, but that's where government working with business can really deliver on this overall target.
I mean, my personal view, and I'll be sort of a little bit political about this, if I may, is that if you have a manifesto commitment in both of the manifestos, which says whichever the target is, and then in week 3 you have to decide on the budget for allocation round 6, and you don't do enough, then you've already got a red cross against one of your manifesto commitments. So they've got to see some reaction there. It's quite a detailed point, and bear in mind that we're sort of from a global perspective. I want to move us to one of the subjects which we talked about it with Alok, but also want to talk about this with you all developers. The issue of supply chains and how supply chains have moved in the last 2 years. How is this affecting you? Clearly this is a global narrative. And what should we do? What more can we do? We've done our industrial growth plan this year for, I think is quite focused and decisive. What do you think we can do to sort of really trigger this? So Charlie, maybe I'll come to you first.
I think we all share the challenge of sort of the supply chain. We all see the pain that's been happening. There's a few companies have been really key to the development of this industry to date, and an industry that's providing essential service in great demand for these companies not to be able to make sustainable pricing and profit to be able to move forward is clearly not a good, healthy sign for the industry. You look across the board, that there's growing pains has been touched on before, be it grid. I think Alice mentioned, whenever you're looking for a grid, you're not getting a grid before 2030, and whether that's onshore and offshore, mid-2030s, onshore and offshore related. Beyond planning, there's even just the technical capability and the technical supply. You look at turbine components, and often it's individual components. I was reading a report recently, and it was talking about towers being a shortfall by the tail end of this decade as well. So I think we need to do a lot more, clearly, but we spend a lot of time looking at how can we create the environment for investment we need to do, but I also think it goes back to what we're saying here is you just need to get projects moving, and when we get more projects moving, coming through, I think the supply chain will then have the confidence, rather than always trying to incentivise, and that incentivization often even comes back to the cost of consumer. I really think what we need to do is just get the projects, and then I think once the supply chain can see confidence in the industry, you'll start to see that organic investment.
Alice, building on that, I mean, there was a big headline earlier in the year about TenneT placing big HVDC orders on GE and Hitachi. How are grid going to respond to this? I mean, people sort of quite openly say if you want to order major equipment now, you're already looking at 2030s. So, I mean, given the demand that comes from the developers and the demand that comes from the TOs, how are we going to handle that? What can we do?
And this is a global, we're not the only country with ambitious targets, as we discussed. So you have this global crunch, and there's a big overlap between the OEMs and the equipment that the generators need and the transmission need. And so, when you talk to the supply chain, I completely agree. What they're really clear is they want certainty and commitment. And if they have certainty and commitment, they will build capacity, they will build skills. And so from a grid point of view, so for the ASTI projects, the 17 strategic projects, we have created a HVDC framework that we've been able to bring the OEMs into and provide that long-term pipeline commitment, certainty, working with the regulator. I mean, what was really key about ASTI was being able to provide that long-term commitment and address it as a full program, not project by project. And then for the onshore works, we've created enterprise delivery partnership, where we've brought in all the partners we need, whether that's from the development feed stage through to planning, consenting, delivery, construction, equipment, so that again we can say, you're here for the long haul, you're here for this whole program of works, you have the commitment and certainty from us to build that up. But just bridging to the kind of the uncertainty around the auctions and what comes next, the difficulty for us is ploughing ahead and planning and developing and getting consent for new infrastructure projects when the generators on the other end of them are not yet certain. Yeah. You cannot get communities to buy in and agree if they think there's a chink of uncertainty on what it's actually connecting. And if we can't get that certainty, then that hinders our ability to give even more certainty and clarity and commitment to the supply chain and to do that in an anticipatory way. So that's why we really do come back to that, the real importance of having that spatial energy plan and kicking into delivery phase so that we can do that. That's really key.
So in the interest of throwing a stick of dynamite on the table, should we get rid of auctions altogether for offshore wind and just have a different way of buying them?
I think that's an option. I think I would like to actually just declare my appreciation of our supply chains, because we often sort of, say they're a problem here, but they've been brilliant. They have brought in new technology, they've been resilient, they've been innovative, they have gone through several cycles of arcane regulation, and they've driven the cost down to a point where we have a problem of success. So let's be confident. If we create the right environment and signals, I think, again, the supply chains can deliver for us. But it's very difficult if you're a vessel owner and operator, a yard, a factory, or whatever part you play, to massively increase your capacity is a real business challenge. You can only do so much of it. It takes time, it takes skills. It means running projects. We all know how challenging those are. So we need to create that environment. The same way we created price signals that help the supply chain respond brilliantly in the last decade, we now need to create capacity signals. So I totally agree with you. It's line of sight to orders that do that. That is bridging between ambitious targets. Ambitious targets aren't enough, so you need line of sight to the orders. I like your suggestion there of a different way of allocating, which, it's not the only way, but it's definitely one of the ways to create that line of sight to orders, because line of sight is certainty. Certainty is lower risk. Lower risk is lower cost of capital. Lower cost of capital means cheaper energy. So it's the most impactful thing that governments can do and that we can do together, is to give supply chain that certainty.
And here to your opening words there, Duncan. I think as a former supply chain person, I wholeheartedly agree.
I'd just add to that, Dan, in the sense that actually I think we need to sometimes look back to see where our success and what enabled our success. And the auctions have enabled our success in the past. It's about now actually tweaking the auctions to actually really reflect what's happening in the current market. So one, apart from reference price, apart from overall budgets, one area we could look at is actually setting capacity targets for the auctions that align to the overall 2030 targets. That then gives certainty, allows certainty for grid, allows certainty for supply chain, because let's be absolutely clear, without grid, without supply chain, we have no industry.
Yeah.
So, we need to find ways to enable that, to deliver that certainty. So one way to do that is actually set capacity targets for the future auctions that actually then align to our 2030 targets and 2040 targets.
Yeah, almost take the theatre out of it and make it a bit more, 6-7 gigawatts a year, away we go. That would be, I think everyone would understand that. Maybe I'm going to have a look at the Slido in a moment, but one of the things I sort of want to just tease out is that we've had this UK leadership position over a number of years. I think in some ways we can be grateful for that, because what it's meant is that we've learned a lot of lessons before other countries maybe have, and some of the things that we're talking around this table now are perhaps symptomatic of that early mover. Is it, for you in your companies, is it important that we stay in that place in the UK and have that leadership role? And what do we do? What should we do to keep it going? What's the action of our sector in that kind of mature, grown-up industry?
Yeah, when you talk about a leadership role, I think in terms of installed capacity, yes, we do have a leadership role. I would say in terms of supply chain delivery, we've got way smaller portion of our pie than we should have. And a statistic I read the other week was that as a country, we've deindustrialized the fastest of all of the G7 countries. So I think that there's ways of looking at success. Yes, we've installed the capacity, we've learned a lot from it. We've been sharing that knowledge in terms of policy certainty, regulatory certainty with other countries and so on. And so I think there is a lot more we can do to kind of retain a quality leadership. I do feel that we are in a position to kind of maintain that, and we definitely should. But maybe thinking in England, for example, the last competitive leasing round we saw was round 3 14 years ago. Yes, we've got round 5 coming up next year, but what we really need is certainty around those volumes coming forward in the leasing process. We've talked about kind of a drumbeat of CFD allocations with a capacity target, but we also need the projects coming through before that to actually get to that point in the future and take them forward. So, completely agree. We should try and keep our leadership position, but let's be crystal clear about what that means to us and how we are going to present ourselves to the wider global industry as being that leader in terms of, policy, regulatory, supply chain, and capacity.
Duncan, maybe I'll come to you.
I think we need to show off a bit as well.
Yeah.
The world turns up at our facilities in the UK to see how it's done. And, I think we can play a massive role in telling how it is, showing how it is, telling the story, retelling the old stories. There's another complacency risk that we think we have learned all those lessons here. But in the dozens of projects we've done, I bet none of us could absolutely promise that our latest project has taken on board all the lessons of the previous ones. So actually, we need to focus on this all the time. And I would like to think that the UK's got great strengths in education and skills development, and we need to do that for ourselves, but actually maybe we could be more ambitious and do that beyond.
Yeah, like it. Charlie?
I don't think it's been a leader for a leader's sake. It's not being, you're not doing the skyscraper race in the UK just to try and stay ahead. Why do we want to do it? I think the industry's going to change remarkably going forward. We're going to have to digitise, we're going to have to really change, but also it's the benefits of doing so. But you're only going to stay a leader if we can show the forward projection, and with that comes the opportunities and the benefits as well. People will be attracted to our industry, the supply chain will be attracted, and that's, I think, the benefits you get out of leadership. But also, I do think we are leading across the UK, because I'm sure like all organisations represented here, we've got people sitting in the UK who are helping us develop and deliver projects across the globe. So we are leading and will continue to do so.
Should I go to the Slido? I'll go to Slido if you want. I'm gonna pull the first question out because it's interesting. You're all companies operating in other markets, which is, should seabed leasing and grid offers be combined? Maybe to expand on that, where you're active in other countries and other markets, what is the best practice here? Because we do have this quite fragmented approach to things. What would you like to see more of streamlined?
Yeah, I think the specifics of that question in terms of seabed leasing and grid, definitely.
Yeah.
I think grid is one of the biggest risks that we see. And being able to, coming back to your, but obviously the strategic spatial plan, which we all would like to see, I think linking up locations, infrastructure would really de-risk the projects. I think going that next stage and kind of proposing a full bundled auction with route to market and so on, I think does have some difficulties, and we've seen issues, in the US where, been awarded kind of PPAs which haven't then been able to be delivered. And I'm sure, some of the, if developers had been allocated a strike price for round 5, for example, I'm sure there'd have been questions then coming back saying, we can't deliver at this price. So I think kind of keeping that route to market to a latter stage, once the project's been developed and the market's, you're a bit closer to FID, I think that's a really positive thing. I think we should keep those separate, but in terms of the grid, as much interaction with that early stage as possible, from my view.
And maybe just to go a little bit out of left field, SSE are expanding in Japan at the moment, I believe. So, and I had Japanese people over last week or 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about basically copying our model in Japan. What's your experience?
And I think that's important, and in the sense that it's to remain a leader, we need to look across the world what's working really well. We've a lot of things working really well here from a UK point of view. But even if you look towards, other countries, whether it's Japan is a little bit earlier in the hockey curve, let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's a huge market, there's no doubt about that. Huge future prospects, but it will take time to get there. But even if you look across some of the European markets, such as the Netherlands, for example, and Alice has talked about TenneT and the proactive way TenneT have approached the grid in terms of actually, that from a risk point of view, that is obviously an advantage. The question, though, is does it support the timeline of the project? So that's where you can't really look at the different elements as standalone. You need to look at how it lies right across the entire value chain, right across the entire project cycle. But I think it's important from a UK point of view, we are looking across the world and picking off what are opportunities that we can actually bring back and use here in the UK.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
It'd be odd if I didn't comment on the grid
Yeah, it would
question,
be
but
odd,
in a sense, I'd probably be repeating. That could be one of the really big benefits of the spatial energy plan. We're in a world at the moment where, each project applies for its connection, and when they get FID, and then our projects are confirmed. Whereas if you can get much clearer on this is where the big sources of energy are going to be, and you can tie that up with the grid connections process, that is a really big unlock. And in terms of our leading role, I think all of the targets are phenomenally ambitious and set us on a path of being leading in terms of offshore wind. There is also an opportunity to be leading in terms of the energy system as a whole, and the Spatial Energy Plan could really unlock that and start to think about where are the big bulk transfers needed in this country. There's a north to south piece, there's an east-west or west-east piece. How do you get a grip of that bulk transfer and get ahead of it and start, taking some inspiration from the past when we superimposed a higher voltage grid on top of the existing to really tackle the sort of exponential growth that was happening in electricity usage. And that's another space in which we can really lead and should really grab that opportunity ahead of us.
I think that's, there's such an important message there about these bulk transfers are going to have to happen. There's a big narrative out there at the moment about put the data centers in Scotland, it's cheaper to lay fibre and all that kind of stuff. It actually, we need the transfer, come what may. We need to get on with that piece. So, anyone else want to comment on that?
My summary, just listening to that, is can do better.
Yeah.
I think we can be more coherent. I'd be slightly wary of trying to lump everything that we do in this 10-plus year development phase into one up front, because we don't want to undermine, for example, a consenting process that we're proud of, and we don't want to undermine what our customer needs, which is price, competition, or at least comfort that is good value for society. So you need to keep those elements. So I'd be wary if you tried to lump everything in one up front.
Yeah. Good. Let's come to another question from Slido then. And this one's quite UK specific, but I think it's actually broadens out to a bigger question about the global market, which is if AR6 is going to underdeliver, can you see projects going ahead with PPAs or different routes to market? I have a view, but this probably is more of a global question than a UK question. Can you build? Is there anyone building projects without CFDs at the moment? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, we are in German waters. We're doing exactly that, and so it is possible, but it needs a set of circumstances and market conditions to make it possible. Because I know everybody knows this, but we're a massively capital-intensive industry. You're making long-term investments. You need some level of certainty to support that funding, and so that needs good counterparties for those contracts. And there's lots of different ways of doing it. Major utilities can, in some countries, give long-term contracts like that. Sometimes it's industrial demand that can do it. What's rare is getting and being able to stitch together gigawatts worth of those contracts in order to support one investment decision in a big piece of infrastructure. So that's it. That at the moment in most places is a missing piece.
I think likewise we've seen greater success across Europe than we have done in the UK in terms of sourcing PPAs and matching what we can produce to the PPA potential partner. But I think you look at the risks that are involved in the project, you look at the risk to any investor, you look at what each of their needs are, and you're just layering in other layers of uncertainty. Whereas a government-backed CFD, I think if you're looking at growth and economies of scale, is going to be the most effective way to do it. And then with that comes part of the trade-off about skills and investment as well. So that's why I think that's so attractive. But if that doesn't happen, as we've seen in other areas, you can go down more of a price-led PPA solution. But I do think the system we've got in the UK, by using it to its advantage, gives us what we need to develop our industry.
And I think, Dan, it's not a case of one or the other. The reality is we need both.
Yeah. In
order to achieve these ambitious targets, we need both. And predominantly in the past, we would have seen CPPAs around onshore. And actually now, but the CPPA market is really evolving and maturing in that regard. And actually, it is not uncommon now to see CPPAs coming more involved in offshore, but it's at that early maturation stage.
Yeah. And I think in some ways the question is asking, is there hope if AR6 isn't big enough that the market could come forward? And I suppose that, you know, there's probably a glimmer, but not much. Look, we've come to the end of our time. Maybe I just sort of, from each of you, sort of a 10 seconds, you know, what's in like, what are you excited about for the next few days? What you're up for? So,
Great.
Melissa.
Yeah, well, I think from the beginning, I think, you know, it's good to look back, and you bring a bunch of kind of long-term energy professionals onto the stage. Everyone loves to spend a bit of time harking back to the good old days and look what we've delivered and patting ourselves on the back. But from my perspective, I think we're at a really exciting time. You know, it's a real kind of look-forward moment. The generation assets are part of a wider energy system, so we need to really think of ourselves sort of going forward in that respect. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of exploring that theme throughout the next couple of days.
Charlie.
I think maturing as an industry, coming together, we realise that where we're all very proud of our own individual achievements, say as developers, the solution lies in all working together. The solution lies with the supply chain, the consenting, etc., who's working cross-business. And that's what I love about these conferences, the opportunity to work with fellow developers, but everyone across industry and come here in a nice safe space and look at what we all need to do.
Alice.
Well, for me, it's about connecting with all my wonderful customers and understanding the perspective and what we can, you know, how we can unlock stuff together and how we're delivering for our customers in terms of grid connections. It's a great opportunity to have everyone together to do that.
Great stuff. And Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, we said earlier on that growing up feels, you know, we're working together maybe in a different way. More mature industry, you know, we're able to do that. And I think this type of event's about people. It's about new people to our industry. So, you know, I'm most excited, I think, about some of the work we're doing to bring new people into our industry and to upskill people into our industry, and to do it working together with some of the other developers, creating joint cohorts to train and upskill. And I'd really like to extend that actually to the supply chains. It's a great way of using apprenticeship levy money, actually. You know, and we've got lots of areas where we're short skills, electrical engineers, for example. And yeah, doing all that more collectively. This is all about people. Yeah.
And it's a great example of the coming of age and growing up as a sector, isn't it? This is what it looks like. So, Steve.
Yeah, I'm just repeating what everyone has already said. It's about that connection. It's about sharing that ambition, and it's about actually, although, you know, we're customers, we're clients, we're competitors, the reality is this industry, to be successful, needs to find ways to collaborate stronger over the next number of years. And conferences like that give that great opportunity to bring everyone together to build on that collaboration and strengthen that going forward.
Brilliant. Well, that brings to a conclusion our first session of the day. And a big thank you to our panellists. So please join me in giving a round of applause to Melissa, Charlie, Alice, Duncan, and Stephen. And I think we'll be back in here in, 15 minutes?